Welcome to Fortune Forecast. I am Daisy, your hostess, and you are joining me in my book playlist as we have started on the book titled How to Live on 24 Hours. The author of this book is Arnold Bennett. It was published in 1910 by George H. Doran Company. It is in the public domain. If you're new to my channel, welcome, and welcome back to my Fortune community. So if you're ready to get started on the next chapter, please do go to the description and click on the timestamp. It'll get you right there. Otherwise, just stay here with me for a minute. Just want to catch up on some of my narrator's comment regarding the previous chapter. Did you catch that where the author was talking about the power of concentration and how important that is? If you have a chance, please do make sure to check out the playlist. I have a book titled The Power of Concentration by Theron Q. Dumont. Hopefully you'll enjoy that. And this author said, mind control is the full element of a full existence. He puts a lot of weight on your ability or our ability to concentrate. And I believe, as I've watched myself, and I love how he talked about, know thyself, that the best thing that we could do is devote time on knowing ourselves, knowing what's good for us, knowing how much sleep we need, knowing how much energy or exercise we need, knowing the foods that really help our body, give us more boost or things like that. I mean, each one of us is so unique. So I do agree with what he said about knowing thyself. For me, I think some of the best time that I've had is when I've taken time to know myself, to know my quirks, to really get to know me. And as I've done that, I've also learned how to appreciate others more. It's interesting how that works. Go ahead, leave me your comments. I'd love to hear what you think about this book and some of these chapters. If you're ready, let's do this. Let's move on now to Chapter 9, Interest in the Arts. Many people pursue a regular and uninterrupted course of idleness in the evenings because they think that there is no alternative to idleness but the study of literature, and they do not happen to have a taste for literature. This is a great mistake. Of course, it is impossible, or at any rate very difficult, properly to study anything whatever without the aid of printed books. But if you desire to understand the deeper depths of bridge or of boat sailing, you would not be deterred by your lack of interest in literature from reading the best books on bridge or boat sailing. We must, therefore, distinguish between literature and books treating of subjects not literary. I shall come to literature in due course. Let me now remark to those who have never read Meredith and who are capable of being unmoved by a discussion as to whether Mr. Stephen Phillips is or is not a true poet, that they are perfectly within their rights. It is not a crime not to love literature. It is not a sign of imbecility. The mandarins of literature will order out to instant execution the unfortunate individual who does not comprehend, say, the influence of Wordsworth or Tennyson. But that is only their impudence. Where would they be, I wonder, if requested to explain the influences that went to make Tchaikovsky's pathetic symphony? There are enormous fields of knowledge quite outside literature which will yield magnificent results to cultivators. For example, since I have just mentioned the most popular piece of high-class music in England today, I am reminded that the Promenade concerts begin in August. You go to them. You smoke your cigar or cigarette, and I regret to say that you strike your matches during the soft bars of the Lohengrin Overture, and you enjoy the music. But you say you cannot play the piano or the fiddle or even the banjo, that you know nothing of music. What does that matter? That you have a genuine taste for music is proved by the fact that, in order to fill his hall with you and your peers, the conductor is obliged to provide program from which bad music is almost entirely excluded, a change from the old Covent Garden days. Now surely your inability to perform the Maiden's Prayer on a piano need not prevent you from making yourself familiar with the construction of the orchestra to which you listen a couple of nights a week during a couple of months. As things are, you probably think of the orchestra as a heterogeneous mass of instruments producing a confused, agreeable mass of sound. You do not listen for details because you have never trained your ears to listen to details. If you were asked to name the instruments which play the great theme at the beginning of the C minor symphony, you could not name them for your life's sake. Yet, you admire the C minor symphony. It has thrilled you. It will thrill you again. You have even talked about it in an expansive mood to that lady, you know whom I mean. And all you can positively state about the C minor symphony is that Beethoven composed it and that it is a jolly fine thing. Now, if you have read, say, Mr. Cribble's How to Listen to Music, which can be got at any bookseller's for less than the price of a stall at the Alhambra, and which contains photographs of all the orchestral instruments and plans of the arrangement of the orchestras, you would next go to a promenade concert with an astonishing intensification of interest in it. Instead of a confused mass, the orchestra would appear to you as what it is, a marvelously balanced organism whose various groups of members each have a different and indispensable function. You would spy out the instruments and listen for their respective sounds. You would know the gulf that separates a French horn from an English horn, and you would perceive why a player of the hautboy gets higher wages than a fiddler, though the fiddle is the more difficult instrument. You would live at a promenade concert, whereas previously you had merely existed there in a state of beatific coma, like a baby gazing at a bright object. The foundations of a genuine, systematic knowledge of music might be laid. You might specialize your inquiries either on a particular form of music, such as the symphony, or on the works of a particular composer. At the end of a year of 48 weeks of 3 brief evenings each, combined with a study of a program and attendances at concerts chosen out of your increasing knowledge, you would really know something about music, even though you were as far off as ever from jangling the Maiden's Prayer on the piano. But I hate music, you say. My dear sir, I respect you. What applies to music applies to other arts. I might mention Mr. Claremont Witt's How to Look at Pictures, or Mr. Russell Sturgis' How to Judge Architecture, as beginnings, merely beginnings, of systematic, vitalizing knowledge in other arts, the materials for whose study abound in London. I hate all the arts, you say. My dear sir, I respect you more and more. I will deal with your case next, before coming to literature. End of chapter 9. Stay here with me. All right. I am turning the page to chapter 10. Nothing in life is humdrum. Hey, make sure that you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with your friends, okay? All right, let's go ahead. Chapter 10. Art is a great thing, but it is not the greatest. The most important of all perceptions is the continual perception of cause and effect. In other words, the perception of the continuous development of the universe. In still other words, the perception of the course of evolution. When one has thoroughly got imbued into one's head the leading truth that nothing happens without a cause, one grows not only large-minded, but large-hearted. It is hard to have one's watch stolen, but one reflects that the thief of the watch became a thief from causes of heredity and environment which are interesting as they are scientifically comprehensible. And one buys another watch, if not with joy, at any rate with a philosophy that makes bitterness impossible. One loses, in the study of cause and effect, that absurd air which so many people have of being always shocked and pained by the curiousness of life. Such people live amid human nature as if human nature were a foreign country full of awful foreign customs. But, having reached maturity, one ought surely to be ashamed of being a stranger in a strange land. The study of cause and effect, while it lessens the painfulness of life, adds to life's picturesqueness. The man, to whom evolution is but a name, looks at the sea as grandiose, monotonous spectacle, which he can witness in August for 3 shillings third-class return. The man who is imbued with the idea of development, of continuous cause and effect, perceives in the sea an element in the day before yesterday of geology was vapor, which yesterday was boiling, and which tomorrow will inevitably be ice. He perceives that a liquid is merely something on its way to be solid, and he is penetrated by a sense of the tremendous, changeful picturesqueness of life. Nothing will afford a more durable satisfaction than the constantly cultivated appreciation of this. It is the end of all science. Cause and effect are to be found everywhere. Rents went up in Shepherd's Bush. It was painful and shocking that rents should go up in Shepherd's Bush. But to a certain point, we are all scientific students of cause and effect, and there was not a clerk lunching at Lyon's restaurant who did not scientifically put 2 and 2 together and see in the once 2-penny tube the cause of an excessive demand for wigwams in Shepherd's Bush, and in the excessive demand for wigwams the cause of the increase in the price of wigwams. Simple, you say disdainfully. Everything, the whole complex movement of the universe, is as simple as that. When you can sufficiently put 2 and 2 together, and my dear sir, perhaps you happen to be an estate agent's clerk, and you hate the arts, and you want to foster your immortal soul, and you can't be interested in your business because it's so humdrum. Nothing is humdrum. The tremendous, changeful picturesqueness of life is marvelously shown in an estate agent's office. What? There was a block of traffic in Oxford Street. To avoid the block, people actually began to travel under the cellars and drains, and the result was a rise of rents in Shepherd's Bush. And you say that isn't picturesque? Suppose you were to study in this spirit the property question in London for an hour and a half every other evening. Would it not give zest to your business and transform your whole life? You would arrive at more difficult problems, and you would be able to tell us why, as the natural result of cause and effect. The longest straight street in London is about 1.5 yards in length, while the longest absolutely straight street in Paris extends for miles. I think you will admit that in an estate agent's clerk, I have not chosen an example that specially favors my theories. You are a bank clerk, and you have not read the breathless romance, disguised as a scientific study, Walter Bagot's Lombard Street. Ah, my dear sir, if you had begun with that, and followed it up for 90 minutes every other evening, how enthralling your business would be to you, and how much more clearly you would understand human nature. You are penned in town, but you love excursions to the country and the observation of wild life. Certainly a heart-enlarging diversion. Why don't you walk out of your house door in your slippers to the nearest gas lamp of a night with a butterfly net, and observe the wildlife of common and rare moths that is beating about it, and coordinate the knowledge thus obtained and build a superstructure on it, and at last get to know something about something. You need not be devoted to the arts, nor to literature in order to live fully. The whole field of daily habit and scene is waiting to satisfy that curiosity, which means life, and the satisfaction of which means an understanding heart. I promise to deal with your case, oh man who hates art and literature, and I have dealt with it. I now come to the case of the person, happily very common, who does like reading. End of chapter 10. Stay right here, my friend. We're going to go ahead now on this video to chapter 11. Serious reading. Novels are excluded from serious reading so that the man who, bent on self-improvement, has been deciding to devote 90 minutes 3 times a week to a complete study of the works of Charles Dickens will be well advised to alter his plans. The reason is not that novels are not serious. Some of the greatest literature of the world is in the form of prose fiction. The reason is that bad novels ought not to be read, and that good novels never demand any appreciable mental application on the part of the reader. It is only the bad parts of Meredith's novels that are difficult. A good novel rushes you forward like a skiff down a stream, and you arrive at the end, perhaps breathless, but unexhausted. The best novels involve the least strain. Now, in the cultivation of the mind, one of the most important factors is precisely the feeling of strain, of difficulty, of a task which one part of you is anxious to achieve and another part of you is anxious to shirk. And that feeling cannot be got in facing a novel. You do not set your teeth in order to read Anna Karenina. Therefore, though you should read novels, you should not read them in those 90 minutes. Imaginative poetry produces a far greater mental strain than novels. It produces probably the severest strain of any form of literature. It is the highest form of literature. It yields the highest form of pleasure and teaches the highest form of wisdom. In a word, there is nothing to compare with it. I say this with sad consciousness of the fact that the majority of people do not read poetry. I am persuaded that many excellent persons, if they were confronted with the alternatives of reading Paradise Lost and going through Trafalgar Square at noonday on their knees in sackcloth, would choose the ordeal of public ridicule. Still, I will never cease advising my friends and enemies to read poetry before anything. If poetry is what is called a sealed book to you, begin by reading Hazlitt's famous essay on the nature of poetry in general. It is the best thing of its kind in English, and no one who has read it can possibly be under the misapprehension that poetry is a medieval torture, or a mad elephant, or a gun that will go off by itself and kill at 40 paces. Indeed, it is difficult to imagine the mental state of the man who, after reading Hazlitt's essay, is not urgently desirous of reading some poetry before his next meal. If the essay so inspires you, I would suggest that you make a commencement with purely narrative poetry. There is an infinitely finer English novel written by a woman than anything by George Eliot or Bronte or even Jane Austen, which perhaps you have not read. Its title is Aurora Leigh, and it is author E.B. Browning. It happens to be written in verse and to contain a considerable amount of genuinely fine poetry. Decide to read that book through, even if you die for it. Forget that it is fine poetry. Read it simply for the story and the social ideas. And when you have done, ask yourself honestly whether you still dislike poetry. I have known more than one person to whom Aurora Leigh has been the means of proving that in assuming they hated poetry, they were entirely mistaken. Of course, if after Hazlitt and such an experiment made in the light of Hazlitt, you are finally assured that there is something in you which is antagonistic to poetry, you must be content with history or philosophy. I shall regret it, yet not inconsolably. The decline and fall is not to be named in the same day with Paradise Lost, but it is a vastly pretty thing, and Herbert Spencer's First Principles simply laughs at the claims of poetry and refuses to be accepted as aught but the most majestic product of any human mind. I do not suggest that either of these works is suitable for a tyro in mental strains, but I see no reason why any man of average intelligence should not, after a year of continuous reading, be fit to assault the supreme masterpieces of history or philosophy. The great convenience of masterpieces is that they are so astonishingly lucid. I suggest no particular work as a start. The attempt would be futile in the space at my command, but I have two general suggestions of a certain importance. The first is to define the direction and scope of your efforts. Choose a limited period or a limited subject or a single author. Say to yourself, I will know something about the French Revolution or the rise of railways or the works of John Keats. And during a given period, to be settled beforehand, confine yourself to your choice. There is much pleasure to be derived from being a specialist. The second suggestion is to think as well as to read. I know people who read, and for all the good it does them, they might just as well cut bread and butter. They take to reading as better men take to drink. They fly through the shrines of literature on a motor car, their sole object being motion. They will tell you how many books they have read in a year. Unless you give at least 45 minutes to careful, fatiguing reflection, it is an awful bore at first, upon what you are reading. Your 90 minutes of a night are chiefly wasted. This means that your pace will be slow. Never mind. Forget the goal. Think only of the surrounding country. And after a period, perhaps when you least expect it, you will suddenly find yourself in a lovely town on a hill. End of chapter 11. Wow, this stuff is good, isn't it? Okay, my dear one, we are on a roll, so stay with me. I am going to turn the page, and it's taking us to chapter 12, titled Dangers to Avoid. I cannot terminate these hints, often, I fear, too didactic and abrupt upon the full use of one's time to the great end of living, as distinguished from vegetating, without briefly referring to certain dangers which lie in wait for the sincere aspirant towards life. The first is the terrible danger of becoming that most odious and least supportable of persons, a prig. Now, a prig is a pert fellow who gives himself airs of superior wisdom. A prig is a pompous fool who has gone out for a ceremonial walk and without knowing it has lost an important part of his attire, namely his sense of humor. A prig is a tedious individual who, having made a discovery, is so impressed by his discovery that he is capable of being gravely displeased because the entire world is not also impressed by it. Unconsciously, to become a prig is an easy and fatal thing. Hence, when one sets forth on the enterprise of using all one's time, it is just as well to remember that one's own time, and not other people's time, is the material with which one has to deal. That the earth rolled on pretty comfortably before one began to balance a budget of the hours, and that it will continue to roll on pretty comfortably whether or not one succeeds in one's new role of Chancellor of the Exchequer of Time. It is as well not to chatter too much about what one is doing, and not to betray a too pained sadness of the spectacle of a whole world deliberately wasting so many hours out of every day, and therefore never really living. It will be found, ultimately, that in taking care of oneself, one has quite all one can do. Another danger is the danger of being tied to a program like a slave to a chariot. One's program must not be allowed to run away with one. It must be respected, but it must not be worshipped as a fetish. A program of daily employ is not a religion. This seems obvious, yet I know men whose lives are a burden to themselves and a distressing burden to their relatives and friends simply because they have failed to appreciate the obvious. "Oh no," I have heard the martyred wife exclaim. "Arthur always takes the dog out for exercise at 8 o'clock and he always begins to read at 8:45. So it's quite out of the question that we should," etc., etc. And the note of absolute finality in that plaintive voice reveals the unexpected and ridiculous tragedy of a career. On the other hand, a program is a program. And unless it is treated with deference, it ceases to be anything but a poor joke. To treat one's program with exactly the right amount of deference, to live with not too much and not too little elasticity, is scarcely the simple affair it may appear to be the inexperienced. And still, another danger is the danger of developing a policy of rush, of being gradually more and more obsessed by what one has to do next. In this way, one may come to exist as in a prison, and one's life may cease to be one's own. One may take the dog out for a walk at 8 o'clock and meditate the whole time on the fact that one must begin to read at 8:45 and that one must not be late. And the occasional deliberate breaking of one's program will not help to mend matters. The evil springs not from persisting without elasticity in what one has attempted, but from originally attempting too much, from filling one's program till it runs over. The only cure is to reconstitute the program and to attempt less. But the appetite for knowledge grows by what it feeds on, and there are men who come to like a constant breathless hurry of endeavor. Of them it may be said that a constant breathless hurry is better than an eternal doze. In any case, if the program exhibits a tendency to be oppressive, and yet one wishes not to modify it, an excellent palliative is to pass with exaggerated deliberation from one portion of it to another. For example, to spend 5 minutes in perfect mental quiescence between chaining up the St. Bernard and opening the book. In other words, to waste 5 minutes with the entire consciousness of wasting them. The last and chiefest danger, which I would indicate, is one to which I have already referred, the risk of a failure of the commencement of the enterprise. I must insist on it. A failure at the commencement may easily kill outright the newborn impulse towards a complete vitality, and therefore every precaution should be observed to avoid it. The impulse must not be overtaxed. Let the pace of the first lap be even absurdly slow, but let it be as regular as possible. And having once decided to achieve a certain task, achieve it at all cost of tedium and distaste. The gain in self-confidence of having accomplished a tiresome labor is immense. Finally, in choosing the first occupations of those evening hours, be guided by nothing whatever but your taste and natural inclination. It is a fine thing to be a walking encyclopedia of philosophy, but if you happen to have no liking for philosophy and to have a liking for the natural history of street cries, much better leave philosophy alone and take to street cries. End of chapter 12, and this concludes the reading of How to Live on 24 Hours a Day